My job was very different to the managing director of A&M, who would have to sort of prove the break-even point. Mine would be, how is this enhancing the logo? What are we saying here about the record label? And that's a very, very difficult thing to do now in a stressed world if you're running a major record label. And so this is why I'm saying that a lot of my message here is not replicable. I'm not saying that this is possible for everybody or anybody in this room. But what I am saying is the search for unique character is really, really important to me. Is that we're living in a measured world where getting a record deal, you know, you've got to kind of walk in with hundreds of thousands of whatever it is, whether it's a like or a viewing or a monthly follow, whatever it is, it's got to be in the hundreds of thousands. But in reality, a lot of that is built through commonality, not through difference. And so the record companies, you know, this is a simple matter of maths. You know, I quit Island Records in 2000. Started my management business, and in 2000 the recorded music industry covering music publishing and records, according to the IFPI, was a $40 billion business. 10 years later it's a $16 billion business, and that loss of over $25 billion per year, that's not, you know, is because we've lost control of pricing to Steve Jobs. We've lost control of piracy, and the industry is being eviscerated. And of course there's massive consequences on that, on artistry, because record companies, they still have to keep the corporate jet flying. You know, they need to make sure that Lucian Grange's chocolate bars are still there on his desk at Universal. And how do they do that? They do that in a number of ways. They cut back on things, you know, that's what business does. Look at Twitter this week. They cut back on things, but they also become conservative. And in my opinion, I felt like I dodged a bullet. I'd had that amazing trajectory over 20 years at Island Records, and then left just at the time when things got really conservative. And what happened was that people stopped investing in unusual, and they started investing in proven. And investing in proven means that you become more conservative. And my last music business iteration, I was chairman and partner in Crown Talent in the UK, which had over 100 clients, and we managed amazing artists like Jessie J, Ella Henderson, Sugar Babes, Becky Hill. My partner Mark Hargreaves and I had, you know, maybe 150 gold discs on the wall in the boardroom. And if you looked at all of mine, if you looked at any of the credits, you'd see a PJ Harvey record is co-produced by PJ Harvey, and every track is written by PJ Harvey. If you looked at any of Mark's, so let's look at Jessie J, there are 20 co-writers, 12 producers, 15 studios, 4 remix engineers, you know, and you then look at the next one on the wall, which is the Sugar Babes, and it's the same 20 co-writers, and it's the same 11 producers, and it's the same, you know, because there is a factory farm of hit writing that goes around the world, and it starts with Max Martin in Sweden, and then it moves on to Stargate, and it goes to Dr. Luke, and then and it travels the world. And you'll see the same credits on Ariana Grande, Nicki Minaj, you know, that's how we've ended up in quite a, in my view, quite a conservative world where effectively, you know, songs are being written and they're being hidden in the top drawer, waiting for the biggest opportunity to come. You know, the big artists to come, then they'll pull it out of the drawer and they'll give it to Ariana Grande because she's the big one at the moment, of that moment. But what had stopped happening was investment in really fresh, new and original talent. And you know, that is one of my regrets of the last 15, approaching 20 years. But having said that, things are changing, because the economies of the music industry through Spotify, and in a way, because of the remedial steps that the record companies took, the money is back, and the money is beginning to flow, and it is getting better. And it's not getting better for everybody, but it is getting better, and in particular, it's getting better for the record companies. But that will have positive influence on the public, in my view, because then they do not have to pursue such conservative policies, you know? So people are beginning to take risks, and you're beginning to hear things signed to major labels that are not part of that conservative paradigm that's been going on for so many years. But anyway, I'm going to talk. You'd mentioned, Trevor, about African music. I'm not an authority on African music, but I've always been interested in African music.
There's a perception of us as a South African musical culture exported.
Yeah.
How it's perceived, and how you would be able to get on in Europe and UK.
Yes.
That gentleman asked the question.
Yeah, it's difficult, you know. There's self-interest has got to be part of every decision you make running a record company, and the self-interest about African music that we made was because we believed that there was an African Bob Marley to be found. And somebody yesterday said to me, "Don't you mean an African star?" And I said, "No. We weren't looking for an African Taylor Swift. We were looking for an African Bob Marley, somebody who had a message for Africa and a message for the world, but a message that could carry that message into the rest of the world." And our investment started with King Sunny Ade. I signed the Bundu Boys from Zimbabwe. We signed Angelique Kidjo, Baba Mal, Salif Keita, Dollar Brand here from South Africa. And we never found the Bob Marley, but Christ, we spent some money trying. We spent some money trying. You know, we felt that we were getting close with some of the artists, but in reality, the pressures of running Island Records, if I can really be honest about it, is that we had a specific label called Mango that was there for what was called world music, which is a dodgy title. It was world music, and the bottom line was so terrible that Polygram, even though I reported to Chris Blackwell, could see the bottom line, and they were beginning to realise that in fact we were over-investing, and we were spending too much money, and we hadn't found what we were looking for, to quote the U2 song, and it became the pressure became enormous to kind of row back and curtail it, which is kind of what ended up having to happen at the time. But having said that, other things happened in the world. Is that what we felt we were bringing to African music was effectively Western production. If you listen to Salif Keita's Sorrow, which is just a groundbreaking record made in 1984 with a French disco producer introducing synths and big symphonic sounds and amazing sounds. It was a piece of groundbreaking work. But now the production that's coming out of Africa, and frankly the rest of the world, absolutely is of equal merit to anything that's produced anywhere in the world. You know, I used to sit in Managing Directors Conference in the 1990s, and I'd listen to the German, I'd sign 9 Inch Nails, and then suddenly Rammstein came along, and I used to laugh at Rammstein because they were like an analog copy, and the production was shit, and oh my God, you know. And now you can't laugh at Rammstein. They'll sell out Wembley Stadium now, you know. And the production that is coming out of the world, and that's because technology has become so ubiquitous, and also the knowledge of how to manipulate technology has become so great, that the music that's coming out of Africa, something is going to give. Something is, and that African Bob Marley that we were looking for. I'm not suggesting that that's the only holy grail. I'm suggesting that's what we were looking for. But that African Bob Marley is coming. She or he, they're coming. I don't know who they are or whatever. You can fill me in if you've got any ideas.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is that the interest in the UK, we now have this fantastic digital station called BBC Radio 6. So if ever you get a chance to listen in, it's not playlist driven, it's choice driven. So the DJs have choice. And I'm so proud that the singer of Elbow, who I signed, Guy Garvey, has got his own show on there, which is fantastic.
And 15 years.
15 years. Jarvis Cocker, the singer for Pulp, who I signed, has got his own radio show. Tom Robinson, who I dropped, has got his own radio show.
Every week.
Every week. So, but this is a radio station that will play whatever it wants to play. And the amount of Afrobeat and Amapiano and things like that that are beginning to be played on BBC Radio 6 is influential. So some Afrobeat, you know, Burna Boy and people like that, they're now on Radio 1, and then suddenly they're working with Beyonce, or they're, you know, and there is a migration, there is an infection that is happening, that is coming out of Africa, that I'm very much hoping that you in the room can keep influencing by bringing brilliant music to it. But the simple reality is, it's always been. There you go, it's the ghost in the room. Because I'm about to say the word that nobody wants to hear. It's about hits. It's always about hits. It's not about doing something excellently that is ordinary. It's about coming up with something that is extraordinary. And it's absolutely going to be about that. One of the beautiful advantages that we had at Island Records too, in my early years, was that because we were searching for things, we were turning over stones that nobody else was turning over, because the major labels just weren't interested in our repertoire. They became very interested when we suddenly sold 22 million albums with Cranberries. They became very interested when we suddenly started having lots of hits. But the simple reality was that we were signing things that cost nothing. And it goes back to that story about the Roaring Boys, £200,000 versus the next signing, Colourbox, £15,000, #1 in 16 countries. Is that we were able to, because the cost base of discovering that alternative talent was so low, was that we were able to nurture people into 3 or 4 albums before they had success. So when you hear Jarvis singing Common People, which you know, I'm not suggesting is I think it's one of the best pop songs ever written, but the reality is that was the 3rd album when that hit. The 3rd album. Can you imagine? That doesn't happen these days, you know. So when the Stereo MCs had a #1 with Connected, and the album won 3 Brit Awards, that was the 3rd album. PJ Harvey didn't really hit stride until the 3rd album, and it was the rare first album, like Tricky's Maxine K, that went in at #3, I think, in the UK charts, that hit straight out of the box. Most of the things that we did took a long gestation period, because our job was to gently push a left field artist towards the middle, and to drag the audience kicking and screaming towards the left, until we found this sweet spot, which was never in the middle, never to the right, like Bon Jovi or Bryan Adams, as brilliant as they were, or Elton John. That was somebody else's business. I got in such trouble once for saying that I was the only managing director in the country that would have got fired for signing the Spice Girls, and that went on the front cover of the Independent newspaper. And of course we're a publicly quoted company, and the shareholders didn't like that. But that's a fact. You know, running Island Records, Chris would have fired my ass for signing the Spice Girls. You know, and so we just had this fantastic mandate. But here's the thing. You know, I asked Trevor a question about what happens if you suddenly work on a film that you realise that you don't respect and you don't like. So we get to, I've survived Island becoming part of the biggest company in the world. I'm still running it. I've made the cut. I'm now managing director of Island Records. And then Polygram decides, Philips, who own Polygram, decides they're going to sell it to Edgar Bronfman and Universal. And so the second major career decision on my behalf is made. And Edgar Bronfman purchases Island Records, and I'm by this stage into my second 3-year term contract. I had made a determination that I was going to be the youngest managing director of Island Records. Yeah, got that. I was going to be the first one to get to 2 contracts. Yes, I'm 6 years in, and then I decided that I was going to be the first to resign rather than be fired. All for it. So I'm 6 years in, and Universal have made a decision, and of course everybody wants bloody economies of scale. So imagine it's not Elon Musk this time; it's Edgar Bronfman who comes in, and I am ordered to merge MCA Records, Universal Records, Island Records, and Motown Records with Island, and I'm given the choice of staying and doing that or going. Chris is gone by this stage. And I realised that if I don't do it, Island is lost. Because A&M has gone as a label. Fucking A&M. Carpenters and the police, and think what A&M brought the world. And it is just gone as a label because it's been swallowed by a giant whale. So Island, with all of its legacy, could have gone the same route. So I decided, really for Island's sake, that I would stay on. And my job was, I had over 350 employees in that UK pool of those, and then think of all the artists that I had. And I was given a target of 56 employees, so out of 350 employees. And I was given the target of reshaping the roster and deciding who to take and who to let go. And it literally broke my heart. It broke my heart because the decisions also became so political, where just a mad example was that we had a promo team at MCA who were really good, radio, TV, who really didn't want to work with me and really didn't want to work with Island and wanted the big payoff that was available to them. So my bosses said, because they really don't want to work with you, and because they really want the payoff, we want you to get rid of your department and keep them. So I was forced to keep the people who didn't want to work with me, who didn't turn up to meetings to listen to the new U2 record or whatever, because they, and it was a political decision. It was about politics. It wasn't about, and that was because they wanted to go with the outgoing MCA chairman, Nick Phillips, and that's what they wanted to join. And the leaders at Universal didn't want them joining the person who wanted them to. It was just bollocks. And worse than that for me was that this happened over a weekend. On the Friday, I went to bed worrying about PJ Harvey's next single, her next album, her next tour, whatever it was. On a Monday morning, I woke up being asked what was going to be the follow-up to Barbie Girl. Because that was my new roster. I went to sleep worrying about Tricky and PJ Harvey. I woke up worrying about fucking Barbie Girl. Very well. Very well. Very impressed, you know, but it eviscerated me actually, and I still had 4 more years to go. And then of course Vivendi bought fucking Universal. Yeah. And as Chris Blackwell said at the time, that's great, it's a French sewage company. It was a utilities company really, but it did deal with sewage. And so a French sewage company bought us, and of course they wanted economies of scale, and you know, that 56 people that I was down to, could I get it down to like 45? You know? And by this stage I've not only got a fantastic UK roster that is thriving and succeeding, I've also got Mary J. Blige, and I've got this stuff coming in from America that was fantastic. And so I had a very, very busy team, but I felt like personally I was losing heart, and I was really, it was breaking my heart actually, because I had kept the logo, and it is still now the Island Group, and so even though it includes MCA and Universal, their names are kind of they're on the masthead, but they're not. It is the island group, and I felt that was the legacy thing that I was able to do, to protect it, to keep the island thing going. But it was really heartbreaking to then, you know, watch it change. And effectively what happened was that I got offered the deputy chairmancy of Universal UK, but I had only just effected the merger, and they wanted me to take on Deutsche Grammophon, Decca Classics, Philips Classics, and on top of MCA, Motown, Island, and Universal. And I knew that my heart was broken, and I knew that I was having difficulty enough holding on to what I had rather than take on that. But what my lawyers had done was put a clause into my employment contract that said that nobody could be promoted above me. Between me and chairman, I was kind of like in my head. And they really needed a deputy chairman, so they appointed Lucian Grainge, who is now the worldwide chairman of the whole organisation and just made $120 million out of the public flotation. But the problem for me was that I would be what the military in the UK would call flying a desk. It would have become a bureaucratic job. And at this stage, I'm still A&Ring more artists than any A&R man in the company. I'm still personally responsible for U2 and Pulp and PJ Harvey and Tricky and all sorts of people where I'm helping them make the records. And I don't want to give that up to become a politician within a record company.
You're an indie.
I'm an indie, and I was an indie by heart, but I was also a creative. You know, I started as a musician, and also, you know, some of the superannuated American egos that were in there was just so horrific, and I just didn't want any part to do with that.
Tainted it.
So I was keeping myself away from it. And effectively, they appointed Lucian Grainge as deputy chairman. I had this clause that said you can't do that. I had just signed my 4th 3-year term. Just saying. And so I got my moment to be the first to walk out rather than be fired. And I said, "You've breach of contract. I'm going, and I'm going to set up my own business," which is effectively what I did. And it was a very emotional moment for me. You know, I had given my life to this label, and I still devote my life to it. And you know, so many, 22 years after that moment, and I fucking love the label. It's like a team, you know, your football team. I gave up my children. I put it into jeopardy because I didn't know whether somebody would just change the name to Universal and get rid of the thing. But I had such awful fights trying to protect it, you know, and I'll give you a very small example. They decided that they were going to disintermediate Island America, its catalogue, from Island UK. So the Island America catalogue would go into Mercury Records in the UK, and the Island UK catalogue would go into MCA Records in America. It wouldn't go to Ireland, and Ireland wouldn't come to Ireland. But what that did, and I had to write a personal handwritten letter to Edgar Bronfman to stop this happening, was that at some point in the history of Island Records, to protect the finances, Chris Blackwell transferred Bob Marley's contract to America. So some of the albums came out, all the early albums came out in the UK, but then the later catalogue came out in America. So that meant that half of Bob Marley's catalogue was going to be released on fucking Mercury Records. And my chairman at the time, John Kennedy, who was a lawyer, just didn't get it. He didn't give a shit. And I was saying, it's like cultural vandalism. It's like smashing the Buddhas in Afghanistan, because you know, it's vandalism.
And it nearly happened.
And it nearly happened. And it took a handwritten personal note to Edgar Bronfman, who called me back and said, "You're absolutely right, it's sorted, don't worry about it." But my bosses in the UK didn't give a shit. And that's what I was fighting all the time, was the people, there was an amazing thing happened once where I had lunch with, I'm talking about 2 lunches. I had lunch with Osman Errol, who was the managing director of A&M, and he was always kind of a bit jealous of Ireland and our ethos. And he said to me, he said, you know, he said, he's talking of himself, he said, I ran a club A&M's a club. And he said, you know, London Records, he said, they're a gang. He said, you run a cult. and we did. We ran a cult. We were a cult dedicated to pushing the boundaries forward and trying to do things different. And it was a fucking cult. And I loved it for that. And I'm still in the culture. I can't. I've tried all the therapy. I've tried everything. Well, Chris Blackwell chose me, and that's the reality. And then the other lunch was with Creation Records. What's his name? Alan McGee. So Alan McGee signed Oasis. He's a huge independent star. He signed Primal Scream. He signed My Bloody Valentine. You know, Stone Roses. You know, a remarkable guy. And we had lunch together, and Alan McGee said of himself, he said, how come I get all the addicts and you get all the psychos? and I said, well, look at us. And he went, oh.